As issues around food security take center stage, I think it's important for a moment to pause and reflect on what the agricultural production patterns around the world actually look like, and from there project where the future flashpoints or hotspots or any other phrase actually you could use could be. Well, to shed light on that, joining me now is Hardeep Singh. We all know him as the former chairman of Cargill India and Amalgamated Plantations. Now he's an active investor in the agriculture space. Is that a fair summary?
Yes.
Okay. Let's just pause for a moment, because we get caught up with the hurly-burly of developments right here in India on food security, government initiatives, etc. But really, India, this region, this part of the world, what are the trends that you've studied on agricultural production and where the deficits could arise sharply?
In summary, the emerging deficits are in the areas of highest population density, essentially in Southeast Asia, East Asia. The largest surpluses are in the Americas. It used to be predominantly the North American continent, but now more and more the South American continent. So products with food, or agricultural and food products, including feed grains, will move from the Americas to the Far East and the Near East, to areas of population density. Incidentally, these are also the areas which are some of the oldest lands in the world, some of the most depleted lands in the world, some of the most intensely cultivated lands in the world, and some of the most intensively irrigated areas in the world. Just to give you a view, India is more intensively irrigated and cultivated than any place in the Americas or Europe. So we are the most intensively cultivated and irrigated.
And does that automatically translate to depleted resources?
And of course depleted resources, because land is a resource. You have to grow on land, and therefore the more you take out of the land, the more you have to put into the land. And it's not a zero-sum game, because land essentially gets depleted over time, and the nutrients in the land will get depleted. There is some that you can replenish at some rate, but there's also the issue of biomatter, which you cannot really replenish at that rate.
Okay. Now, what then is the way forward? Because that, even though it's a summary view, is a fairly bleak view.
I think we need to take a realistic view on what we are going to be and where we are going to be. What has saved us and particularly India, for millennia, or at least the last 50 years, is vegetarianism. We have been saved by vegetarianism, because had we been a natural meat-eating country, by now we would have been a basket case in terms of agriculture. If you see what's happened in China, the large deficits that China is now evidencing are largely driven by the propensity to eat meat. So as the Chinese population has started to earn more, with this huge GDP growth rate, earning levels increasing, their natural propensity for meat eating has come to the fore, and therefore you've seen poultry, you've seen hog meat grow at a rate that was unheard of, and some visualized it, but that is what has driven the deficit, because meat is grain to meat to human consumption is much more inefficient, obviously, than grain to human consumption directly, because there is a factor that you lose in conversion to meat. That's the big one. And the second one that has really stressed world agriculture, which is fixable, is biofuels, because you have energy markets, which are something like 10 times as large as agricultural markets, being sought to be influenced by agricultural markets. And therefore you've got this, which is energy, being influenced by this, which is food. And you take a little bit out of this, it stresses it dramatically, and doesn't really impact
energy in a big way.
That doesn't have that large an impact on energy. So that's the big issue, and that is fixable. The second part of it is fixable. Food habits are not fixable. Food habit changes are more sticky. And in countries like India, that should concern us, because 70% of India's vegetarians, by one analysis, are vegetarian by economic compulsion, not by religiosity. So they can eat meat as meat becomes available. And that's going to be disastrous, because if you look at Bombay, which is a diaspora of different populations, including a large Gujarati population, which is naturally vegetarian, poultry consumption is now up to world average. In India, it's 1/7 of world average. So that's the sort of beta which India can get to. And it's disastrous, because once that happens, there's just not enough, and there is already not enough.
I'm going to pick up another thread, which is as we grapple with issues of there just not being enough food and, the threats that are posed by climate change, there is now a debate around whether, the future of investment in agriculture is going to come from the private sector, and what kind of effects could it have on large societies like India, which really, struggle with affordability. Do you want to throw in your view on that debate? Because I've just had a conversation where the underlying threat seems to be that the private sector is going to outspend research institutions, going to outspend in terms of identifying new strains of crops. And what is that going to do to societies like India?
Yeah, and it's not, the concern is not unfounded, but I think it's hugely exaggerated. If you look at the last 60 years, we've not had any significant agricultural breakthrough coming out of the huge spend that we've done in agriculture. And so it can be argued that 50 years ago we did something, but typically it's been adaptation of stuff that's been done elsewhere. You've got people in India claiming to be the father, the grandfather of the Green Revolution. Essentially, it was product that came out of Mexico, which we adapted. And it was CIMET that developed that product. Norman Borlaug brought it in. We have not developed in the industrial space, and you've got this huge industrial research mechanism with laboratories all over the country. Not a single molecule has come out of India yet in the last 60 years of the heights of public spending. If you look at a shorter time period, over the last 10 years, the only magnitude change in agricultural productivity in India, magnitude change, has been in cotton. And that is entirely driven by one company's private investment. And all biotechnology. So I think that's what we need to be cognizant of. If we are not going to have enough food, then the discussion on what kind of technologies we embrace to be able to produce more and therefore to be able to provide more food to our population, which is growing at the rate of 1.5% a year. And 1.5% population growth means something like 3% food production increase, because people start consuming more complex foods as they move up the economic ladder. We need to have a realistic assessment of what technologies we will embrace. So it's not an all or nothing game.
Fair enough.
We have already accepted biotechnology in cotton, but then we tend to feel it's a no. And yes, we should not open the floodgates for everything, but I think that discussion needs to be taken to an economic and rational plane rather than a purely emotional NGO-driven debate. And I think they provide a very vital sort of counterpoint. But the debate needs to be more reasoned rather than more loud.
Okay, we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.